I never thought a single moment could fracture the foundation of trust I had built with someone. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. 8 months, 8 months of laughter, late night talks, stolen kisses, the kind of moments that felt sacred in their simplicity, broken in a single devastating realization. It all started during the week we decided to take a break. I remember the afternoon vividly. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, and I was curled up on the sofa with my laptop. He called me that morning, his voice distant, almost strained. I just, I need some time, he said. And like a fool, I agreed, convincing myself that maybe space was healthy, maybe this pause was temporary, maybe it would make us stronger. But nothing prepared me for the bombshell. Scrolling through my phone aimlessly, avoiding work and pretending I wasn't thinking about him, I stumbled upon a message that felt like a punch to the gut. His first love. The girl he swore he'd never see again. They met during our break. They were together. He slept with her. My hands shook and my heart felt like it had cracked open. I reread the message multiple times, each time hoping it was some cruel joke, a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew. Reddit had once warned me about this kind of betrayal. Not in the legal sense, because technically we weren't together, but in the brutal, soul-crushing sense of emotional treachery. The comments echoed in my head. Open quote, he didn't technically cheat, but that doesn't make it hurt any less. Trust is sacred. You may have forgiven in law, but emotionally, this is a wound that cuts deep. Close quote. I closed my laptop and buried my face in the cushions, just trying to make sense of the storm raging inside me. Every memory of him laughing, of holding my hand, of whispering promises felt tainted. How could someone so careful with words suddenly obliterate all the unspoken agreements we had? That night, I couldn't sleep. The ceiling stared back at me, mocking. I tried to distract myself with my phone, read it again, searching for stories, anything that could offer validation or advice. But all I found were mirrors of my own heartbreak. Women describing the betrayal, men defending their actions, strangers dissecting morality like surgeons examining a cadaver. Open quote, you can't control what he does when you're not together. It's not the act, it's the emotional attachment that kills. If it hurts you this much, that says everything about the kind of relationship you deserve. Close quote. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call him, confront him, demand answers. But fear rooted me to my bed. What if I hated him? What if I broke down completely? My fingers hovered over the phone, but no words came. I opened the message again, this time noticing the casualness in his tone, the nonchalance, and my chest tightened. In the days that followed, my behavior changed. I found myself checking his social media compulsively, a ritual I had never indulged in before. Every like, every comment, every picture of him smiling, or worse, pretending nothing had happened, twisted the knife further. Reddit users seem to predict this. Open quote, the urge to check is natural, but it won't heal you. Step back, protect your sanity. You're witnessing the aftermath of your own heartbreak. Distance is your friend. Close quote. Yet I couldn't stop. Every notification sent my heart racing. Every small detail became evidence, proof of a world I no longer understood. My friends noticed my withdrawal, my hesitation to laugh, the way I flinched when his name appeared in conversation. They offered advice, practical, gentle, like a lifeline, but nothing could reach the raw wound inside me. I replayed our last conversations before the break. He had seemed stressed, distracted, but never cruel. I had sensed distance, yes, but never imagined it would manifest in this way. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was quiet, insidious, lingering like smoke in a room I thought was safe. And every Reddit comment about he didn't technically cheat felt like salt on an open wound. The first confrontation I attempted was messy. I called him one evening, voice shaking, trying to be rational. Can we talk? I asked, my words trembling. He paused, then laughed lightly. I guess. What's this about? I wanted to yell, to accuse, to tear down the walls of civility he had built, but the words stuck. I know about her. I know what happened. Silence. Then, in a voice that was calm, almost detached, he said, "We weren't together. I didn't cheat." It felt like a hammer to my chest. The calmness, the detachment, it was unbearable. I wanted to remind him of the promises, of the emotional covenant we had created, but the words faltered in my throat. My mind scrambled, trying to understand, to negotiate the unbearable, loving someone who had broken me so completely. The Reddit threads I had scrolled through flashed in my memory had voices of strangers giving me courage, empathy, even anger on my behalf. Open quote, "You are allowed to feel betrayed, even if legally he did nothing wrong. Don't let anyone tell you how to feel. You are valid. This is a wake-up call. Decide what kind of love you deserve." Close quote. I hung up, tears stinging my eyes. It was a small victory, or maybe just the beginning of acknowledging the betrayal. I didn't know if I could forgive him or even if I wanted to, but for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something. Not relief, not closure, but clarity. And yet, the thought of running into him, of seeing him laugh as if nothing had changed, gnawed at me. Each day became a careful balancing act between rage, heartbreak, and the desperate desire to reclaim a piece of myself. I told myself I wouldn't check his phone, but I did. I told myself I would move on, but every memory anchored me. The community voices on Reddit became my secret companions, guiding me through sleepless nights. Every comment, every shared story of betrayal and survival felt like a map through unfamiliar territory. Some nights I read them over and over, clinging to the narratives of strangers to make sense of my own. I didn't know where this path would lead, whether back to him or away forever. All I knew was that the pain was real, raw, and consuming. And somehow, amidst the heartbreak, I found a strange kind of solidarity. Proof that while my world had fractured, I wasn't entirely alone. This was only the beginning. The confrontation, the emotional wreckage, the decisions I would have to make, they were still waiting, looming like storm clouds. But for now, I let myself sit in the quiet aftermath, letting the truth sink in and letting the reality of who he was and who I needed to be slowly take shape. The days after the revelation blurred into each other. Every routine I had seemed meaningless. Mornings felt hollow, afternoons endless, and nights stretched like an endless ocean of thought. My friends urged me to step back, to breathe, to reclaim a sense of normalcy. But how could I when every memory of him was tainted by a hidden betrayal? I found myself revisiting the past, replaying every small interaction for signs, for moments I might have missed. The nights we stayed up talking until dawn, the way he would brush my hair out of my face, the casual promises whispered in quiet moments, they all seemed to mock me now. Had I been naive to trust so fully? Reddit became my confessional. I scrolled endlessly through threads about betrayal, trust, and heartbreak. Anonymous strangers laid bare their own pain, and I found fragments of my own reflected in their words. Open quote. "It's the emotional attachment that hurts, not the legality of the act. You didn't cheat on him, yet it feels like betrayal because of your emotional investment. Trust is hard to rebuild, even if technically nothing was wrong." Close quote. I clung to these voices, drawing comfort in their validation. They articulated the chaos in my head better than I could. It felt less like being alone and more like being part of a larger, fractured community of the betrayed. I remembered one afternoon, weeks before the break. We had wandered into a tiny coffee shop tucked away in a quiet street. He had laughed at a pun I made, his eyes crinkling at the corners, the kind of laughter that made your chest ache with warmth. He had taken my hand, thumb brushing over mine, and whispered, "I've never felt like this before." I replayed that memory obsessively. The way he looked at me then seemed so sincere, so utterly devoted. How could someone capable of such tenderness also betray the very foundation of our connection? It didn't make sense. And yet here I was, drowning in the aftermath of that very contradiction. The urge to confront him again gnawed at me. I needed to hear it from his lips to understand how someone could compartmentalize love, lust, and lies so seamlessly. But every time I considered calling, I hesitated. Reddit warned me about this too. Open quote, confrontation won't heal you. It might make you feel better momentarily, but it won't fix the breach inside you. You're seeking closure from someone who cannot give it without risking more pain. Close quote. Despite the warnings, I couldn't resist. One evening I called, my heart hammering against my ribs. Can we talk? My voice trembled, but I tried to sound steady. He paused. I guess. What now? I swallowed hard. About her? About us? About everything. He sighed, a sound that used to comfort me, now unbearable. I thought you knew that we had agreed to the break. No, I whispered, my throat tight. I didn't want this. I trusted you, even when we weren't together. I thought you felt the same. Silence. And then, faintly, almost imperceptibly, he said, I didn't cheat. We weren't together. Those words ricocheted in my mind, each repetition like a hammer striking a fragile wall. I wanted to scream, to hurl accusations, but my voice faltered. He sounded so calm, so rational. How could someone rationalize something that felt so viscerally wrong? That night, I returned to Reddit, seeking solace, seeking guidance, anything to anchor myself. Strangers typed words that felt like lifelines. Open quote, it's not the legality. It's the betrayal of your trust. Honor your feelings. You can forgive, but only if it feels genuine. Don't force it. Sometimes love is not enough. Protect your heart. Close quote. Their words echoed as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I thought of the promises we had made, the laughter we had shared, and the intimacy we had built. All of it seemed fragile now, easily shattered by a choice made in a moment of selfish desire. I began to analyze his behavior, searching for patterns, for explanations. Perhaps he truly felt nothing for her. Perhaps it was a fleeting moment, a lapse in judgment. But the doubt, the gnawing uncertainty lingered. Trust, once fractured, is nearly impossible to restore. I realized that forgiving him would not be simple. It would require an almost unnatural suspension of pain. I started journaling, capturing my thoughts, my pain, my questions. Each entry became a map of my emotional landscape, a way to externalize the chaos inside. I documented every memory, every small betrayal I imagined, every fleeting moment of doubt. Reddit threads were referenced, quoted, even copied verbatim into my notebook, as if their collective wisdom could guide me through the darkness. Open quote, you are allowed to feel betrayed, even if legally he did nothing wrong. The fact that it hurts so much is proof of your capacity to love. Your emotions are valid. Honor them. Close quote. And somewhere between writing and reading, I began to see the outlines of what I needed. I couldn't cling to him blindly anymore. I couldn't allow the betrayal to define me, but neither could I ignore it. I needed boundaries, clarity, and ultimately a choice that honored my emotional truth. Weeks passed. I oscillated between anger, sadness, longing, and numbness. I replayed conversations in my mind, dissected texts, analyzed his tone. Every detail mattered. Every small smile he had shared with me, every fleeting touch became proof of a connection that seemed almost too good to be true. And now it felt like a cruel joke. In the quiet moments, I imagined confronting him fully, speaking all the words I couldn't muster in real life. I trusted you, I believed in us, and you made me question everything. The fantasy was bittersweet. It offered a sense of power, but also a reminder of the vulnerability I had surrendered. Reddit users often warned against obsessing over closure. Open quote, closure is a myth. You create it yourself through boundaries and self-respect. He doesn't get to decide how you heal. That's yours to navigate. Close quote. These words, repeated over and over, became my mantra. I began to internalize them, to recognize that the path forward was mine alone. I could choose forgiveness or I could choose distance. I could choose to rebuild trust, or I could protect myself from further pain. By the end of the second week, a small shift occurred. I started noticing things that were mine again. The joy in reading, the comfort in a warm bath, the relief of a good night's sleep. These were simple, often overlooked pleasures, but they reminded me that life didn't end with betrayal. It adapted, evolved, and offered small healing moments. Yet the storm inside me wasn't over. Confrontation awaited. Conversations that might shatter me or lead to understanding loomed ahead. And I knew that the journey to reclaiming myself, to truly navigating the aftermath of his choices, was only beginning. Partai Keto. The confrontation I had been avoiding finally arrived. I remember the morning vividly. Gray clouds hung low, mirroring the heaviness in my chest. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone trembling in my hand, rehearsing every word I might say. My mind raced, but each thought felt inadequate. How could I encapsulate months of trust, heartbreak, and betrayal in a conversation that might last only an hour? I called him, and this time I demanded his undivided attention. We need to talk, face to face. My voice wavered, but there was an edge I hadn't felt before, a steel beneath the surface. He hesitated, then agreed. Fine. Meet me at the park, 4 p.m. Sitting on the bench where we used to sit together, I watched him approach. The familiar gait, the easy smile. It was maddening. How could someone who caused this pain still look so normal, so unbothered? We exchanged greetings and then silence. That suffocating, loaded silence that carried months of tension in its weight. I know about her, I started, trying to steady my voice. I know what happened while we were broken up. He looked at me, expression unreadable. I told you, we weren't together. I didn't cheat. But you slept with her. You promised you wouldn't. You swore, I said, my voice rising, and I believed you. My hands shook. Do you have any idea what it's like to trust someone completely, only to have that trust obliterated? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I get that you're hurt. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. And yes, technically, we weren't together. Technically, I spat, my heart racing. Technicalities don't erase the betrayal. You know what you did, and you chose to do it anyway. The tension between us was palpable. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, to never look back. And yet, part of me, the part that loved him, the part that remembered laughter and late-night talks, wanted to hear him say he was sorry, to mean it. I am sorry, he said quietly. I didn't plan this. I wish things had been different. But sorry felt hollow. It didn't acknowledge the depth of my pain, the nights I cried alone, the constant anxiety, the obsessive checking of messages. Reddit voices I had clung to came rushing back to me. Open quote, sorry doesn't erase betrayal. Actions speak louder. You are allowed to feel what you feel. Don't let words manipulate you into forgiving prematurely. Boundaries are crucial. Protect yourself first. Close quote. I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. I need to know why. Why her? Why now? He looked away, a shadow crossing his face. It wasn't about her. It was a lapse, a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. It was a moment I regret. Regret. That word felt like a thin veil over a canyon of destruction. Regret doesn't heal. It doesn't undo the betrayal. I shook my head, tears threatening to spill. Do you understand what it feels like to find out the person you trusted most didn't hold your heart as sacred as you held theirs? He didn't answer immediately. I could see it in his eyes. Guilt, yes, but also frustration. Frustration at being confronted, at being expected to navigate my emotional chaos. And yet, he was the cause of it. I remember the comments from Reddit, open quote, sometimes confrontation isn't about changing them. It's about understanding your own boundaries. You get to decide what's acceptable, what's not. Don't let anyone dictate your healing. Close quote. Those words steeled me. I realized that this conversation wasn't about getting him to apologize or even to explain himself fully. It was about reclaiming control over my own heart. I can't ignore this, I said, voice firm now. I can't pretend it didn't happen. I need space to process what this means for me. And you need to understand that trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. He nodded slowly. I understand. I'll give you the space you need. It was a bittersweet acknowledgement. I wanted to feel relief, but instead, I felt the weight of what was lost. The intimacy, the trust, the belief in a shared future. It was gone, shattered into fragments that might never fit together again. Over the next few days, I created boundaries. No more obsessive checking of his social media. No more compulsive rereading of texts. I needed to reclaim myself, to find stability outside of him. Reddit threads became my sanctuary again, each comment reinforcing my resolve. Open quote, self-care is not selfish. Protect your heart. Healing is a process. Don't rush it. You are allowed to feel anger, sadness, confusion. Let it move through you. Close quote. I journaled daily, mapping my emotions, setting intentions for recovery. I wrote letters I would never send, articulating my hurt and my expectations. I recognize that part of loving someone is loving yourself enough to walk away when your heart is at risk. Yet, amid the healing, doubt lingered. Could I forgive him? Could I rebuild what we had? Reddit users offered mixed advice. Some encouraged cutting ties completely. Others suggested cautious reconciliation. The truth, I realized, lay within me, not in strangers' words, not in his explanations. One evening, I found myself at the park again, the same bench where we had talked before. The wind carried a chill, but the air felt cleansing. I closed my eyes and imagined a future where my heart wasn't tethered to betrayal. It wasn't easy. The ache of what had happened remained, but so did a glimmer of hope, a possibility of strength, resilience, and eventual peace. The confrontation had ended, but the journey was far from over. Decisions loomed, paths forked, and every choice carried weight. Could I forgive him fully, or would distance be the only way to preserve myself? Only time, reflection, and the unrelenting guidance of my own heart would tell. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The confrontation had passed, but its echoes lingered in every corner of my mind. I had reclaimed pieces of myself, small victories at first, then larger ones. But the fracture in my heart remained, a reminder of trust broken and promises unkept. I started to immerse myself in routine again. Morning jogs, long walks, coffee with friends who had stood by me through the heartbreak. I filled journals with my thoughts, organized my apartment, and allowed myself moments of solitude without guilt. Each step was deliberate, an act of reclaiming ownership over my own life. Reddit remained a constant companion, its anonymous voices offering perspective, empathy, and even validation. Open quote, healing isn't linear. Expect setbacks and don't beat yourself up for them. Forgiveness is a choice, not a requirement. Protect yourself first. Sometimes walking away is the only way to honor your worth. Close quote. These voices became guiding lights as I wrestled with the question, could I forgive him? Could I allow him back into my heart without the shadow of betrayal looming over every gesture, every word? I decided to meet him one last time, not to argue, not to accuse, but to confront my own feelings and draw boundaries clearly. The cafe we chose was quiet, a neutral space, the kind we had loved for its simplicity. Hi, he said, cautious. Hi, I replied, taking a seat. Silence settled between us, heavy but controlled. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say countless times, but when the moment arrived, I realized I only needed a few words. I've spent these months thinking, I began. I've thought about us, about what happened, and about what I want for myself. I realized that healing comes first, and I can't risk my heart on someone who betrayed my trust, even if it wasn't technically cheating. He nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. I get it, he said quietly. I wish things were different. I really do. I don't want to hate you, I said, and I don't want to cling to pain, but I also can't pretend everything is fine. I need to move forward, with or without you. The decision was mine, and it felt empowering. The heartbreak was still there, the ache still present, but for the first time in months, I felt the stirrings of true autonomy. I had survived betrayal, faced the chaos of my emotions, and emerged with clarity. Over the following days, I focused entirely on myself. I explored hobbies I had abandoned, reconnected with friends, and allowed myself to enjoy life without guilt. The temptation to check his life, to scrutinize every action, lingered at times, but I resisted. I was learning that freedom wasn't just about leaving him behind, it was about reclaiming my own narrative. Reddit, too, played a subtle role in my recovery. I found threads where others shared stories of betrayal and recovery. Some had forgiven, some hadn't, but all emphasized the same truth. Healing was an active choice. Open quote, you get to define your boundaries. You get to decide what love looks like for you. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away. Heartbreak is a teacher. Listen, learn, and grow. Close quote. Those words became mantras. They reminded me that while I had loved deeply, my self-worth was not dependent on his actions. I had the power to choose my own path, to honor my emotions without being consumed by them. Months later, I sat on my balcony one evening, watching the city lights flicker against the dusk. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. The betrayal still haunted me, but it no longer controlled me. I had faced it, processed it, and made conscious decisions about my boundaries and my future. I realized that trust once broken might never be fully restored, but resilience could be built. I had learned to navigate pain, to honor my own heart, and to embrace the possibility of love without fear. And as I closed my journal, the last entry reading like a declaration of independence, I understood that the story didn't end with him. It ended with me, whole, stronger, and capable of moving forward. Sometimes the most profound drama is not in the betrayal itself, but in the journey of reclaiming yourself afterward. I had cried, raged, and questioned every memory, but I had survived. I had rebuilt. And in the silence of my own company, I found clarity, courage, and an unexpected sense of gratitude for the lessons, for the growth, and for the chance to love myself fully once again. Kết thúc Parker khép lại câu chuyện, cô gái xử lý hậu quả, hồi phục cảm xúc, xác lập ranh giới. Nội tâm thấm đẫm trải nghiệm Reddit, tiếng vọng ngoài đời, giúp cô nhận ra giá trị bản thân, giữ mạch drama và hồi tưởng nhưng kết thúc với sự tự chủ, sức mạnh và hy vọng. Vậy là toàn bộ câu chuyện 8.000 từ, chia bố part đã hoàn thiện. Nếu muốn, mình có thể tổng hợp lại một bản liền mạch 8.000 từ, chỉnh mạch, kể khi suôn sẻ sẵn sàng đọc như một truyện dài hoàn chỉnh. Bạn có muốn mình làm không? It was just past 2 in the morning when he nudged my shoulder, his voice low but insistent. Can we talk? I lay there, eyes closed, pretending to be asleep. My heart was racing, not from fear, exactly, but from the heavy weight of exhaustion and the sudden, unwelcome flood of emotions. I could feel him staring at me, waiting for some sign, some acknowledgement. But all I could do was breathe slowly and hope he'd think I was already lost in dreamless sleep. We had been together for 3 years. 3 years of laughter, arguments, weekend trips, shared meals, and lazy Sunday mornings. Yet in that moment, the foundation of our relationship felt tenuous, almost fragile. It wasn't that I didn't care about him. God, I did. But 2 a.m. was no time for the deep, emotionally charged conversation he wanted. My body ached for sleep, my mind was foggy, and my patience had long since evaporated. He shifted beside me, sighing. Come on, he whispered. I just need to tell you something. I felt a pang of guilt, even through the shield of my feigned slumber. Guilt and resentment, a confusing mix that churned in my chest. Resentment because he hadn't considered my exhaustion. Guilt because pretending to sleep felt like a betrayal of our intimacy. But the alternative, facing a full-blown emotional discussion in the middle of the night, seemed unbearable. I could hear the rustle of the sheets as he sat up, frustration evident in the sharp exhale that escaped him. I had done this before, not often, but enough times to know the pattern. He wanted depth at inconvenient times. I wanted to preserve the quiet moments, the space where life wasn't dissected and judged. As I lay there, I could hear my own heartbeat, slow and deliberate, like a drum keeping time against the chaos. My mind wandered, recalling the moments leading up to this night. We had had a fight the previous week about something trivial. He hadn't called me enough during a busy workday, and I had snapped. We reconciled quickly, but the undercurrent of unresolved tension lingered. Perhaps this was his attempt to dredge it all up, to finally talk things through. I pretended to stir slightly, as if my eyelids twitched in sleep, but gave no verbal response. I could feel him leaning closer, a weight of expectation pressing down on my chest. "Hey, I know you're awake," he murmured. I swallowed a sigh. If he opened his eyes and saw mine, the charade would collapse. But I remained perfectly still, allowing my face to relax, my breathing slow and even. Reddit had once warned me about this, about the silent rebellion people employ to avoid emotional labor at inopportune times. But I had never imagined my own guilt and frustration could be so sharply magnified in a moment like this. I had no defense ready, no clever way to navigate the confrontation without sacrificing my need for rest. He flopped back onto the pillow beside me, muttering something under his breath. I couldn't hear it clearly, but the tone was accusatory, tinged with disappointment. My stomach churned. He was hurt, yes, but so was I. Hurt by the pressure, by the expectation, by the impossibility of giving my full emotional presence at this ungodly hour. I remembered the last time we had a conversation like this. It had been late at night, too, and I had stayed up, trying to parse every nuance of his feelings, trying to validate, sympathize, and comfort him. I had ended up crying quietly, drained and resentful. That memory lingered like a cautionary tale in my mind. I would not do it again tonight. I felt his hand brush mine, a casual touch, or maybe a desperate attempt at connection. My body tensed instinctively. I didn't pull away, but I didn't respond. The space between us was thick with unspoken words, his need for acknowledgement and my need for silence. Minutes stretched. What felt like hours passed in a blur of anticipation and quiet tension. I could sense him debating whether to shake me awake, to demand my attention, to force the conversation he thought necessary. And somewhere in that calculated silence, a strange power began to emerge, a control over my own boundaries, however tenuous. Finally, he exhaled sharply, a sound heavy with frustration and disappointment. "Fine," he said, voice low but sharp. "I guess you don't care enough to even try." My stomach twisted. That wasn't what I wanted him to think, but I had made a choice to prioritize my own mental and physical well-being at the cost of his feelings. And even as I felt the prickle of tears, the sting of his judgment, I knew I had drawn a line that perhaps needed to exist for me to survive the relationship without losing myself. The next morning, the aftermath was palpable. His silence was deafening, a quiet punishment that hung over the apartment like smoke. He moved through the kitchen with minimal words, avoiding eye contact, each gesture deliberate and cold. I could feel the tension coiling tighter around my chest. Guilt gnawed at me, but so did a simmering resentment. He had imposed an emotional labor at a time when I could not meet it. Was it fair of him to demand that I suspend exhaustion and personal boundaries for the sake of a conversation that could wait until daylight? Reddit comments replayed in my mind. Open quote, "Not wanting to have a deep conversation in the middle of the night is completely reasonable. Silent treatment is manipulative, not a valid reaction. Boundaries are healthy. Guilt is natural, but don't let it consume you." Close quote. I remembered the countless threads where people debated this very scenario. One partner seeking immediate emotional validation, the other seeking respite, and the chaos that ensued when boundaries clashed with expectations. Some voices argued for patience, empathy, compromise. Others argued for self-preservation, for the right to decline emotional labor at inconvenient times. I spent the morning navigating breakfast in awkward silence. He gave short, clipped responses. My attempts at light conversation met with minimal engagement. The apartment felt smaller, colder, weighted with unspoken tension. I found myself retreating into my own thoughts, trying to parse the complicated emotions swirling within me. Anger, guilt, frustration, love, and exhaustion collided in a confusing storm. Was I wrong for prioritizing my need for sleep? Was he wrong for expecting immediate attention? Reddit offered no definitive answer, only empathy and reflection. The threads seemed to say, "Your feelings are valid, your boundaries matter. His response is his own responsibility." By the afternoon, I realized that communication, even at its best, required timing. Emotional conversations demanded presence, energy, and attention, things that 2 a.m. could not provide. And yet, the choice to retreat, to preserve myself, came at the cost of his hurt, a hurt that I could neither fully assuage nor ignore. I began to journal, capturing the entire night, my emotions and my rationale. I wrote about the guilt, the resentment, the fear of judgment, and the struggle to balance intimacy with self-preservation. I quoted some of the Reddit threads that had comforted me, embedding their wisdom into my own reflections. Open quote, "You can care deeply for someone and still maintain boundaries. That is not betrayal, it is self-respect. The silent treatment is never a fair response. Speak your truth, protect your peace." Close quote. Hours later, he finally spoke, cautiously, his tone softer than the morning's coldness. "I guess we can talk now," he said. "But I want you to know I felt ignored, hurt." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "I understand. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just needed sleep. We can talk now when I'm fully present." The relief that softened his features was small but genuine. The conversation that followed was tentative, careful, balancing honesty with understanding, guilt with boundaries. It was the first step toward reconciliation, toward recognizing that relationships required negotiation, not surrender, not silent endurance, but a careful weaving of needs and respect. By nightfall, the apartment felt lighter, though not entirely free of tension. I had survived the confrontation, navigated the guilt, and upheld my boundary. And while the drama wasn't over, the ripples of that 2 a.m. moment would linger. It was the first glimmer of understanding, of compromise, and of a relationship that could potentially survive its first true test of patience, empathy, and respect. It felt like walking through fog. I had slept in later than usual, but the weight of guilt lingered, pressing down on my chest. He hadn't spoken much, and when he did, it was with clipped words, cautious tones, and a subtle edge of resentment. The apartment, once familiar and comforting, now felt like a tension-filled cage, every corner echoing the unspoken argument that had erupted in the quiet hours. I couldn't stop replaying the events in my head. My decision to pretend to be asleep, a small, self-preserving choice, had set off a cascade of emotional consequences. I had thought I was justified. After all, 2 a.m. was not a time for heart-to-heart confessions. But his silence, the way he avoided my eyes, the weight of his disappointment, gnawed at me relentlessly. Guilt mingled with anger. Anger at him for imposing an emotional burden at an impossible hour, anger at myself for choosing avoidance rather than engagement. I kept turning to Reddit, seeking validation, advice, or at least a reminder that I wasn't entirely wrong. Open quote, "Boundaries are healthy, especially at 2 a.m. You did nothing wrong. Pretending to sleep is better than snapping or saying things you might regret. Silent treatment is manipulative. Don't internalize it as your fault." Close quote. These comments echoed in my mind as I brewed my morning coffee. They reminded me that while guilt was natural, it didn't mean I had acted immorally. But emotions are rarely rational. I felt like a villain and a victim simultaneously, a paradox of care and self-preservation. Later that day, he moved around the apartment quietly, making small gestures that used to feel comforting, but now only highlighted the distance between us. A cup of coffee left on the counter, a note that read, "I'm going for a walk." No words, no explanation. His silence spoke louder than any conversation could, a subtle punishment that made the air thick with tension. I tried to engage him, suggesting we talk, that we find a better time to discuss feelings, concerns, and frustrations. Each time he nodded, promised to talk later, and then drifted away into another room or left the apartment entirely. The effect was maddening. The very act of preserving my rest had triggered a silent war neither of us wanted, but both of us participated in unconsciously. I found myself writing in my journal, attempting to process the chaos. I noted every detail: the time of night, the way he had asked for a conversation, my own physical and emotional exhaustion, and the guilt that followed. I tried to articulate the complexity of feelings, the need for self-care versus the desire to be a supportive partner, the frustration at emotional imposition versus the empathy I still felt for him. Reddit comments I had saved became my private counsel. Open quote, "You can care for someone and still set boundaries. That is not selfish, it's essential. The silent treatment tells more about them than it does about you. Don't take it personally. Being tired is a legitimate reason to postpone heavy conversations. Timing matters." Close quote. These words became mantras I repeated throughout the day. I knew I needed to hold on to my boundaries while also acknowledging his feelings. It was a delicate balance, like walking a tightrope over a pit of emotions I barely understood. By evening, the tension had not eased. Dinner was quiet, punctuated only by the clink of utensils on plates. I had attempted light conversation, like asking about his day, sharing small observations, but each response was short, clipped, distant. The emotional rift that had begun at 2 a.m. remained, now widened by hours of unspoken resentment. I realized that what had seemed like a minor act, closing my eyes, pretending to sleep, had consequences far beyond my initial calculation. Relationships are fragile in the way they are built on consistent emotional presence. A single night of avoidance, even for self-preservation, could ripple through trust, understanding, and connection in unexpected ways. In the quiet moments before bed, I scrolled Reddit again, looking for narratives like mine. Others had shared their experiences, avoiding late-night confrontations, pretending to sleep, facing the wrath of a partner's disappointment. I read through comment after comment, finding empathy, shared experiences, and sometimes harsh criticism. Open quote, "You did the right thing. Being forced into emotional labor when you can't manage it isn't healthy. Next time, set clear expectations about timing. Don't leave it to chance or exhaustion. Feeling guilty is normal, but don't let it consume you. You acted responsibly." Close quote. These words comforted me in a strange digital way. They validated my experience and reminded me that I wasn't alone in navigating such delicate, emotionally charged dynamics. Sleep came fitfully that night. I dreamed of conversations unspoken, of accusations unmade, of reconciliations that never occurred. Each dream left me exhausted, but also strangely determined. I knew that avoiding a conversation at 2 a.m. was not the end of communication. It was a temporary pause, a necessary breath in the storm of relational demands. The following morning, he approached me, his expression softer, tinged with remorse. "Can we talk now?" he asked. There was no accusation in his tone, only a cautious hope. I nodded. "Yes," I said, "when we're both awake and alert. I can give you my full attention then." It wasn't a full resolution, but it was a beginning. The recognition that timing mattered, that boundaries were valid, and that emotions required space to be expressed responsibly was a subtle shift in our dynamic. As we talked later that day, carefully and deliberately, I noticed the tension begin to ease. Our conversation wasn't perfect. It was punctuated by pauses, hesitations, and occasional frustration, but it was real. We navigated each topic with more patience, listening rather than reacting, validating feelings rather than assigning blame. By the evening, the apartment felt lighter, not fully free of tension, but moving toward understanding. I reflected on the lessons of the past 24 hours, that self-preservation is not betrayal, that boundaries are essential, and that communication requires not only honesty, but timing. Reddit had been a subtle guide throughout, offering perspectives and reflections that I could internalize without confrontation. Anonymous voices had helped me articulate my own feelings, recognize the legitimacy of my needs, and navigate the minefield of guilt and resentment. For the first time since that night, I felt a small sense of relief. The drama was not over, but the path toward resolution was beginning. And in the quiet moments of reflection, I understood that relationships are as much about navigating boundaries and timing as they are about love and trust. Days passed, and the tension that had begun at Tau AM refused to dissipate. He moved around the apartment quietly, occasionally offering half smiles that once would have warmed me, but now felt hollow, almost rehearsed. I could see the weight of unspoken frustration in his posture, the tight set of his jaw, the avoidance in his eyes. Our interactions had become careful negotiations, a delicate dance around the emotional minefield we had created. I found myself second-guessing every word, every action. A casual touch on the arm, was it affectionate or a subtle accusation? A question about dinner, was it genuine curiosity or an attempt to measure my guilt? My mind, already exhausted from the previous night's events, churned relentlessly. Reddit threads replayed in my head, snippets of advice and shared experiences. Open quote, boundaries are healthy, even if your partner is upset. Don't let guilt override your needs. Timing is crucial in emotional conversations. Early morning or late night talks rarely yield productive outcomes. Your feelings are valid, and so is the way you handle them. Close quote. The words were a lifeline, yet the emotional strain remained. I wanted to talk to him, to bridge the gap that had widened overnight, but I also feared the volatility of our interactions. Every attempt at communication seemed laden with potential missteps, each word a possible spark in the still, smoldering tension. Finally, one evening, I decided we needed to address the issue directly. I found him in the living room, flipping through a magazine, seemingly absorbed in its pages. My heart pounded as I approached. "We need to talk," I said firmly, trying to steady my voice. He looked up, a flicker of apprehension crossing his features. "About last night?" he asked cautiously. "Yes, about last night, and everything leading up to it. I can't keep pretending it didn't happen or minimizing my feelings." He sighed, setting the magazine aside. "I know I pushed too hard, but I just wanted to connect. I needed to talk, and you shut me out." "I didn't shut you out," I said, frustration rising despite my attempts at calm. "I protected myself. I was tired, emotionally drained. That's not the same as ignoring you, and it's not fair for you to punish me with silence or resentment." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Punish you? I'm hurt. I feel dismissed, and that matters too." I nodded, acknowledging his pain while holding my ground. "I understand that, but you also need to understand my perspective. Timing matters. Emotional conversations require energy, presence, and a willingness to listen, not just to speak. At 2 a.m., I couldn't do that, and pretending to sleep was my way of maintaining the boundary I desperately needed." He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I didn't think about it like that. I wanted to be heard. I wanted to be understood." "And you are," I said softly, "but understanding requires context, patience, and mutual respect. You can't demand it at the cost of my well-being." The conversation was difficult, filled with pauses, hesitations, and moments of tension. I could feel the emotional distance slowly closing, yet it was fragile, easily disrupted by a wrong word or a misinterpreted gesture. But the act of speaking openly, honestly, and without judgment was a step forward, a fragile bridge over the chasm that had formed between us. Later that night, I reflected on the complexity of relationships. Love wasn't just about affection, shared experiences, or intimacy. It was about navigating boundaries, timing, and mutual respect. It was about understanding that emotional needs could not always align perfectly, and that compromise required empathy from both sides. Reddit comments continued to echo in my mind. Open quote, Healthy relationships involve negotiation, not surrender. It's okay to prioritize your own mental health. That doesn't make you a bad partner. Conflict is natural. How you handle it defines the strength of your connection. Close quote. These digital voices had become an unexpected support system, helping me articulate my feelings, validate my experiences, and navigate the murky waters of guilt, resentment, and love. The following days were a delicate balance. We began scheduling conversations during times when both of us were alert and receptive. The arguments became less reactive, more thoughtful. We practiced listening without interruption, acknowledging feelings without judgment, and expressing needs without accusation. I noticed subtle shifts in his behavior. He became more attentive, more patient, more willing to negotiate rather than impose. And I, in turn, allowed myself to be more present, more open, and more willing to engage emotionally without fear of being overwhelmed. Yet, the memory of that 2 a.m. night lingered, a reminder of the fragility of trust and the consequences of unmet boundaries. It served as a cautionary tale, guiding our interactions and shaping our understanding of each other. I realized that relationships are not defined solely by moments of love and joy, but by the way conflicts are navigated, boundaries respected, and growth fostered. The drama, the tension, the silent accusations, all of it became a part of the story we were writing together, a testament to the challenges and triumphs of intimacy. By the end of the week, we had reached a fragile equilibrium. Conversations were scheduled thoughtfully, emotions expressed consciously, and mutual respect reinforced through actions rather than words alone. The apartment no longer felt like a tension-filled cage, but a space where negotiation, understanding, and growth were possible. In the quiet moments, I reflected on the lessons of that night. Self-preservation is not betrayal. Boundaries are essential. Communication requires timing, patience, and empathy. And love, while powerful, is only sustainable when both partners are willing to navigate the complexities of human emotion with care and respect. Reddit had been a silent guide throughout, offering perspective, validation, and insight. The anonymous voices, speaking from their own experiences, helped me navigate guilt, resentment, and fear. They reminded me that my feelings were valid, that my boundaries mattered, and that the path to resolution required honesty, courage, and patience. As I lay in bed that night, reflecting on the journey thus far, I felt a cautious sense of hope. The drama was not entirely resolved, and challenges would undoubtedly arise in the future. But for the first time since that fateful 2 a.m., I felt empowered, not by avoidance, not by silence, but by the clarity, boundaries, and resilience I had cultivated. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, the fog of tension that had settled over our apartment began to lift. The air felt lighter, the walls no longer echoing with unspoken resentments. Our conversations, once strained and cautious, became more natural. Yet the memory of that 2 a.m. moment lingered, a subtle undercurrent in every interaction, a reminder of how fragile trust can be, even in a relationship built over years. I had learned to prioritize my emotional needs without guilt. The guilt that had once gnawed at me, the self-reproach that followed pretending to sleep, had begun to lose its hold. I recognized that boundaries are not betrayals. They are essential for healthy connection. And while he had been hurt, his response, the silent treatment, the distance, was not mine to fix or internalize. Reddit remained a quiet companion. I scrolled through threads of similar experiences, finding solace in the shared pain and wisdom of strangers. Open quote, "Boundaries are the backbone of healthy relationships. Protecting yourself isn't selfish. It's okay to walk away if the emotional cost is too high. Forgiveness is a choice, not a requirement." Close quote. Their voices, anonymous yet comforting, reminded me that my feelings were valid. They reminded me that navigating guilt and resentment requires self-awareness, courage, and patience. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, I noticed a subtle shift in him. He was more attentive, more deliberate, less reactive. The frustration that had once been so palpable seemed tempered by reflection and understanding. And I, in turn, allowed myself to relax, to be present without fear of being overwhelmed or dismissed. We began to establish unspoken rules for our communication. Emotional discussions were scheduled at times when both of us were alert and capable of listening. Minor disagreements were addressed promptly, rather than festering into late-night confrontations. Boundaries were respected, needs were communicated clearly, and empathy became the guiding principle of our interactions. Yet, despite these improvements, the memory of that night remained a quiet cautionary tale. It reminded me that love alone cannot sustain a relationship without respect, timing, and mutual understanding. It reminded me that emotional labor cannot be demanded. It must be offered willingly and received mindfully. I reflected on my own growth. I had navigated guilt, resentment, and fear. I had maintained boundaries in the face of pressure, and in doing so, had discovered an inner strength I hadn't realized I possessed. The relationship had been tested, and while the outcome was not perfect, it had forced me to confront my own limits, values, and needs. One morning, as I sipped coffee on the balcony, I realized that healing is not a single moment, but a process. It is built through reflection, communication, and self-respect. It is reinforced by small acts of honesty, patience, and empathy. And it is sustained by the understanding that while love is powerful, it is not absolute. It must be nurtured, protected, and balanced with personal boundaries. He approached me quietly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry for that night," he said softly. "I didn't realize how much pressure I was putting on you." I smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and cautious hope. "I understand now," I said, "and I've learned that we both have to respect each other's limits. Love is not just about being together. It's about understanding, timing, and boundaries." The tension that had once seemed insurmountable had dissolved into understanding. The drama of that night had not been erased, but its lessons had been integrated into the foundation of our relationship. We had learned that emotional intimacy requires not only vulnerability, but also timing, empathy, and mutual respect. In the quiet moments that followed, I felt a sense of empowerment. I had survived emotional turmoil, navigated the complexities of guilt and resentment, and emerged with clarity and resilience. The relationship had been tested, but so had I, and I had grown stronger for it. Reddit's anonymous voices, once a source of guidance, had become a mirror for my own thoughts. They had helped me articulate my feelings, validate my experiences, and navigate the delicate balance between self-preservation and love. Their wisdom had been subtle yet transformative, reminding me that I was not alone in facing the challenges of intimacy, boundaries, and emotional complexity. By the end of the month, a fragile equilibrium had been established. Conversations flowed more naturally, boundaries were respected, and empathy guided our interactions. The memory of that night remained, but it no longer carried the same weight of guilt or fear. It was a reminder, a lesson, and a catalyst for growth. I understood, finally, that relationships are living entities, shaped by the choices, boundaries, and respect of the people within them. Love is not enough on its own. It must be accompanied by understanding, timing, and the courage to navigate discomfort with honesty and compassion. As I closed my journal that night, reflecting on the journey from that fateful 2 a.m. to the present, I felt a sense of completion. The drama had not been erased, but it had been transformed. The lessons learned had been internalized, the boundaries respected, and the love tempered with understanding. In that moment, I realized that the story was not just about him, not just about the consequences of pretending to sleep. It was about me, my growth, my resilience, and my capacity to navigate the complexities of intimacy without losing myself. And in the quiet of the night, as the city lights flickered in the distance, I felt a profound sense of peace. The drama had shaped me, tested me, and ultimately empowered me. I had survived the storm, maintained my boundaries, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more attuned to the delicate balance of love, respect, and self preservation.